We're here to demystify compliance for kids' games, a helpful look into safety and privacy considerations. I just want to read this because I think it's important for us to just have a little bit more context. We're going to talk about what it means to offer kid-focused games and apps with social or data collecting features, the challenges that that might pose. We'll look at some legislation affecting this arena and help you understand how you can keep your games safe for kids, but also comply with these regulations. And then on top of that, we'll take a look into what third parties might be doing within your apps. To help set the stage, excuse me, to help set the stage for this discussion, I'd like to just play a recent episode of Silicon Valley. Has anyone seen this in the room? Yes? Everyone has? Okay, maybe some of you haven't, so we'll play it. And as noted here, definitely this is not kid-safe content.
Dinesh, I think you accidentally disabled my access keys for the video chat data repository.
No, actually I deleted them on purpose.
What the fuck, Dinesh?
I'm sorry, I really am.
You can suck a dick.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Nice blazer.
Incredible. Do you think I have too much product in my hair?
Nope. I think you should use more.
Quite a turnaround for a company that wasn't exactly soaring.
Oh, it was soaring, Emily. Right into a clogged toilet, and not just like a standard clogged toilet.
Are you familiar with COPPA?
Who? That's the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act.
This act establishes strict guidelines to protect the privacy of younger children on the internet. You are in gross violation of this act.
51,000 estimated underage users, times an average 25.6 chat sessions per user, times $16,000.
$21 billion?
I mean, I knew Dinesh was going to fuck this all up, but honestly, this couldn't get any better.
Every sound is $16,000.
Fuck! All right, don't think about that. Just think about how to solve this massive, massive problem.
How's it going?
Good.
Well, look, I've been there, man.
No, yeah.
But then I pulled down my pants, sat down. But instead of shit, I threw up into my pants.
Well, I was CEO for 11 days.
Okay, so you noticed that they talked about $16,000 per violation under COPPA. That has now increased to $40,000, so that number of $21 billion could be many times that amount. GDPR, is anyone in this room familiar with GDPR? GDPR, okay, great. So it's a new European regulation that covers the entire European continent and now has some regulations around data collection from children. And the fines there, we'll talk some more about it later, the fines there are as significant as 10 to 20 million euros or 2 to 4% of your annual sales. So quite significant too. The question I have though is this realistic? Is it realistic to have a fine of $20 billion for a COPPA violation, for a kid's privacy violation? And we've seen recently with some cases that were brought by the Federal Trade Commission, including one just this month against VTech, they were fined $650,000 for a COPPA violation, despite the fact that many thousands of kids were affected, and it was a pretty significant violation. So, despite the video, I wouldn't worry that you're going to be fined $20 billion, but certainly you should be looking at this area. And then finally, third-party certification, as Michael mentioned earlier, can certainly help shield you from enforcement. Okay, with that background, I'd like to just get some brief intros of the panelists. Please tell me your name, your role, and the games and apps that your company offers. So we'll start with you, Tami.
I'm Tami Bhaumik. I head up marketing and brand and communications at Roblox. We are a 100% user-generated content platform, technology platform that allows kids to create and design games, publish it out on our platform to millions of players. So we have about over 50 million monthly active users now on the platform all around the world. We've got over 2 million young developers and creators, some of them making over $3 million a year. And we've got a wide range of games on our platform, ages anywhere from 7 into late teens. Top of the bell curve is around 9 to about 12.
Hey, I'm Dylan Collins. I'm the CEO of SuperAwesome. I'm currently sitting between my two favorite kids game developers in the entire world. Privileged position. We build the technology that powers under 13 engagement for game developers, brands, content owners. Our tech is used by hundreds of companies at this point, and I suppose we reach in aggregate somewhere north of about 500 million kids around the world. North America, Europe, and APAC as well.
Hi, I'm Paul Milham. I work at WildWorks, and I am the technology side of our live ops team. So our internal tools and systems that help protect our kids are what my team makes. I don't have any super cool numbers to impress you with, but Animal Jam, which we make, is still pretty awesome.
Okay, great. So I'd like to start with a simple question. What would you say is the #1 compliance challenge and risk for kid-directed games and apps today? #1 compliance challenge. And it doesn't have to be COPPA, it doesn't have to be GDPR. What would you say is the #1 challenge? Tami?
You know, part of the biggest challenge that we face, because our community is all user-generated content, half the time the parents don't know what the kids are doing in creating a lot of this content. So a lot of our focus is educating families and parents out there in terms of good digital citizenship. So I would say that's probably our #1 challenge.
So parents not knowing what their kids are creating. Dylan?
Well, I guess we come at it from a slightly different perspective because we're not content developers per se, which is why I'm infinitely jealous of both of you guys, particularly for the animals. Look, I love you both equally. I think for us, because we operate in the digital media ecosystem, so we are dealing with developers, we are dealing with brands, advertisers, agencies. We're dealing with a lot of companies that don't, particularly on the advertising side, that don't have an expertise in the kid space, right? So they're coming in with a lot of sort of very data-driven practices and data-driven requirements, and they're saying, hey, well, we need this to happen, or this is sort of the standard that we're going to need here, and you're sort of educating them about, look, this is the under 13 environment, here's what COPPA says you can't do, here's what GDPR and GDPR-K, which is the kids component, says that you can't do here. And I think there's, as the media space, the media part of the kids ecosystem shifts from being TV-driven to digital-driven, and all of that money starts to try and figure out how to come in, there's entire cohorts of that part of the sector that are, that we are educating on, look, this is how you engage in the under 13 space. So I think it's the same educational challenge, slightly different audience. Oh, it definitely helps when they're parents.
Yeah, I think just the safety of the children is the hardest challenge. I mean, that's a really broad thing to say, but COPPA and these laws, that's really the minimum that you need to safeguard against, right? These are really very minimum laws. And if you want to actually keep the children safe, I'm a parent, and I wouldn't necessarily say COPPA's guidelines would constitute safety. So a lot of role play, things like that happen online, and we need to make sure that's appropriate for the virtual world, that we make sure there's not toxicity there, and that bigger challenges, like worst case is predation or something like that, right? We need to make sure that exchange of personal information isn't going on in the world. So that level of safety, I think guarding that is probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think that like so much of the internet and so much of the games community has kind of been built with the assumption that kids don't actually exist, right? So like, in terms of like tools and processes and practices and everything else, they just assume that everyone is an adult, and therefore sort of data collection and that level of kind of transparency is okay.
So, I think that what you brought up, I think COPPA is bare minimum. right? So for companies to thrive and grow and for us to have legitimacy given the change of guard in how kids and adults consume media and entertainment, clearly over the last 2-3 years, behaviors have changed dramatically. So it is up to all of us to figure out ways to continue to educate parents, families, kids about how to protect themselves, right? We spend an inordinate amount of time, because we feel it's important, to spend time talking to parents, callers that call in that have concerns. We dig and we find out exactly how much they know about how our platform works. And typically the response is, I have no idea what my kid does online. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in this industry.
And do you find, sorry, I'm hijacking. Do you find, I've got a question for both of you. Do you find this getting better or worse in terms of parental understanding?
I actually think it's getting worse, because
It's not what you were meant to say.
Well, I know, I'm sorry, but I do think that it's getting worse with the advent of more companies that are out there, and also companies that are don't necessarily have all the tools and resources that we all do, and the education. So they're just putting content out there, right? And so they're fueling this fire. So it's about working with the best and the brightest that are out there to try to figure out ways to communicate and educate the market.
So I'm hearing, if you can bear with me for a second, Paul. So I'm hearing parental education, one of the biggest compliance issues, toxicity, as you mentioned, Paul, content creation, not knowing what kids are creating, and COPPA is not a big deal at all. Not a big deal. Everyone here agree? COPPA, not a big deal?
Well, I don't think anyone's actually saying that, Shai.
I don't think that's what we said, Shai.
That is a gross misrepresentation of what was just discussed.
Please
I never said that, did I? Did you say that?
We need a lawyer.
You're twisting our words, Shai.
Any lawyers in the room? Okay, so what about for the smaller guys? What about App Store guidelines, App Store requirements? How many folks in the room have had their kids' apps rejected by Apple or not approved for the family section in Google? Okay, 2? Wow. Dr. Panda and Budge. Okay. Later approved, okay. So certainly we're seeing, from our standpoint on the kidSAFE seal, that App Store guidelines are often a burden and a hurdle to get past, sometimes for the silliest reasons and sometimes for no reasons at all. Michael, when you did get rejection, did you get a reason for the rejection? A clear reason? Not so clear. Okay. Is App Store guidelines a challenge for others in the room? On the kid side? Yes, okay. How about the platform? How about a difference between, let's say, web and mobile? Any unique challenges that present themselves as you go from one platform to another? AR, VR. I'll talk some about Internet of Things, but web to mobile, Paul, Tami, any differences there? As far as the compliance challenge.
And let me think about it for a second.
So Roblox is fully cross-platform. So we remove the barriers to play for our user base. So kids can jump in, whether you're on an iOS device, you're on a Mac, you're on a Windows, everybody can jump into a game and play together. So our situation is a bit broader, I would say, because the cross-platform adds another element. We are really, really focused on our filters. Filters are really, really important for Roblox because there's a social element too, built into our game experience in the worlds. You can chat with one another. So PII is really an important factor. We stay on top, and in all honesty, it's a game of whack-a-mole. We have moderators, we have an entire product and engineering team that is dedicated to making sure our filters are as tight as they can be. Also, with partnering with Shai and team, they make sure that we are on top of things and that our filters are tight and in place, and that we're always constantly updating to protect PII.
Paul, web versus mobile.
Sorry, what?
Web versus mobile, internet versus.
Yeah, so one thing that we've run into is kind of a difference in audience between the two platforms. Our games, we have one mobile game and one web game, so they don't actually play together, but the web game is usually under attack a lot more by just different everyone, really. So that's one trend we've noticed. You know, the game client itself, just the technology is more susceptible to people trying to break in and manipulate your games. I mean, technically, I don't think there's any reason for that, but we've noticed that difference in the audiences.
I think one of the other issues that we tend to see is the difference in ecosystems between mobile and web, and sort of the nature of play in terms of kids and parents. So often when kids are playing on a mobile device, you know, it's a parent's device. So you're dealing with sort of, you know, a logged-in parent in an app store. So for example, I don't know if Apple are still doing this, they were up until relatively recently. If you were a kid and you search for sort of a kid's title that isn't in the kids and family category, but is still, let's say, a 4+ age title, you will get served adult ads against that, even if it's a 4+ title, right? And again, the argument is, well, okay, it's an adult account that you're logged in on, but still sort of that behavior isn't really what you want to be seeing. And I think with, you know, going back to web and desktop, because it was more of an open framework, you didn't have those issues. I mean, you know, it's not mobile is bad and desktop is good, but I think, you know, the mobile ecosystem, you know, is definitely a little bit more walled garden and built specifically to not be open in some senses. And I think we're seeing kind of unforeseen consequences out of that.
Interesting. And I think on the VR side, anyone here have a VR app aside from Roblox? Any VR, AR type apps? No? Okay. Well, on the VR side, and VR is new, virtual reality is new for the kid space. There are still very few kid-focused games in virtual reality platforms, but we're seeing voice chat become an issue within the VR space, right? Whereas in mobile and web, you mostly have text-based chat, keyboard chat. In VR and Xbox and other similar platforms, you have voice chat. And how do you filter and moderate voice chat? You can't. There's really no way to do it.
So I can speak to that from a Roblox standpoint. Because our filters are so stringent, what we have seen is an adoption of other third-party like Discord usage with our users in conjunction with Roblox, because they do want to have that experience. In fact, we actually just had a conversation with the Discord product team yesterday to figure out if there was a way that we could collaborate to make sure that there was COPPA compliance, right? How we could figure that out with Discord, because we know that such a huge part of our audience using Discord to play their games.
Tami, what's happening on Discord? Tell the audience, for those who don't know, are not familiar with Discord.
So Discord, they would kill me if they heard me describe it like this, but it's a little bit like Skype. You've got audio, you've got video, and you're able to play games within Discord. It's primarily used for the gaming industry, but they have grown like wildfire. Wildfire, over the course of the last 2 years. They're rampant. And so, you know, there's a lot of, it's meant for 13 plus, but what we do find that there are younger people going on there as well.
Dylan, tell me, what do you think about third-party integration? #1 compliance challenge with third-party tools like ad networks, analytics, attribution tools.
Great question.
In a few sentences, please.
#1 issue with third-party integrations are usually that they're a bag of shit because they haven't been built for under 13. Like there's what I've kind of started to call this adult engineering bias that creeps into a lot of stuff, which is, you know, you often have engineers who are sort of trying to build something that they think theoretically is going to make sense for kids, and they make decisions that aren't practically useful. That's one problem. The second problem is that you've got a lot of third parties, you know, that sort of think they might be COPPA compliant, and that maybe their salespeople will tell you, and then you sort of say, okay, well, we need a letter that's actually signed by your board, and that kind of goes up, and all of a sudden the conversation stops pretty dead because they can't actually give you that. And we've seen that with a lot of ad tech companies, a lot of analytics companies. You know, there's issues around sort of fraud detection. There's a lot of issues around social. And, you know, it's hard for a lot of these companies to be incentivized to actually release something or invest the engineering in under 13 or something that's COPPA compliant, because it's not a big enough space for them relative to everything else that they're doing. So it's an audit that everyone should do, because we've seen, I think the class action last year was based around third-party data collection.
Yeah,
I mean, it was like, I don't think it was valid, but it was still filed, right?
Yeah, with a few of the folks, I think, on this banner.
Oh dear, who have I offended?
And I think this is really a tricky thing to control even within your organization, especially with a web-based product or something. It's very, very easy to integrate plugins or third-party scripts, super easy to drop them in. And if your developers aren't aware that these laws exist, I mean, some of them don't, and if they don't have that on their mind as they're building things, you can quickly end up with something that that's collecting data you're not aware of.
You know, in addition to that, if you're taking advertising and on your site, I think that it's something to also really be aware of. There's a lot of legacy code out there that advertisers just simply they send over everything. They just drop JavaScript onto your site, and it's not COPPA client. It's old and it doesn't need to be there.
We actually did a study on this, and we looked at all the data that was being captured by mainstream like ad tech players, so things like DFP and everything else, and based on sort of the ads that were being shown in kids' content. And the data that we compiled showed that by the time kids are 13, something like 72 million data points had been captured on them by exactly things like that.
Per child.
Which is insane.
And that's just
per child, right?
And
but
that's
between the ages
messy.
of like 3 and 12.
That's messy for any company, right? They need to be on top of that because that is a direct violation.
That's going to be one of the next class actions. I'm convinced of it.
Anything we miss as far as top compliance issues that are on the minds of the folks here? No? You're doing such a good job. Yeah? Okay, great. So let's shift and close this out with a word or two on what should be the focus in terms of addressing compliance issues. What's the number one issue where companies, even the smaller guys, should spend to be compliant?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if
Paul, start with you.
Like your finance. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
If your finances are a big concern, I mean, you need to. The legal requirements are a must, right? Like you have to meet those. But as soon as you get over that, you need to start meeting like actual safety concerns of the children, and a lot goes with that. I mean, it's just morally, I think that's the right thing to do. But you also have brand concerns, right? Any fallout, like parents complain, or they might do news interviews, things like that. That bad press can really damage your brand, and so you really need to watch out for that. I think that should be a priority.
You just scared everyone in the room from making games.
Tami, how about you?
So
number
I think
one focus.
Just number one. You know
number
how hard
one,
that is
just
for
one.
me.
I just want one.
So I think the thing is PII, making sure all of that's protected, and I think that there is, you can partner with Shai's team, and you can make sure that you're always compliant. I think that's the easiest thing to do. There's a lot more separately.
Dylan?
Let me say something slightly different. I think like building kids games and kids apps is really, really, really hard because it's really hard to actually survive economically, right? You know, the two companies, two developers you're looking at up on stage are absolutely the outliers, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I think if you're building, you need to not rule out any revenue stream. There are no sort of you should look at subscription, you should look at transactions, you should look at advertising, you should look at absolutely everything when you're building, and stay compliant within all of that. So I think you gotta not disassociate your compliance from how you're monetizing.
So from Tami, I'm hearing PII security for purposes of protecting yourself against enforcement and brand reputation. Paul, I'm hearing safety.
Yeah.
Safety for the same reasons. And from Dylan, I'm hearing money.
Get the money. Get the money. Get the money, but get the safe money. Get the compliant money.
Okay.
And could I jump in there with Tammy's point? Don't think you have to do this alone. Like you can, there's lots of resources. Even if you don't have the funds to hire someone to help you, there's lots of resources on FTC's website. These laws actually aren't that long. You can read it. Like spend the time to go through and just actually read it and find out what's in there. But I probably can't recommend enough. Just find a partner, especially some sort of safe harbor providing partner, and I think that's something you should absolutely do to protect yourself.
Okay, great. So moving on to a little bit more in depth about safety. Both Roblox and Animal Jam have pretty vast virtual worlds and user-generated content platforms. What is the minimum expectation for you guys in terms of moderating that world? Minimum expectations. Give me maybe 3 things that you must do at a minimum to keep it relatively safe. Paul, you want to start?
Sure, I can go. So,
3 things.
Minimum. Okay, you need a chat filter for sure. Anything a machine can do, you should have a machine doing, because machines work for cheap and they usually don't complain that much.
Whitelist, blacklist, combination, third party.
Yeah, there's some very good third-party filters out there. I would recommend that because they're even AI-driven, and you can get a lot more in-depth than what you'd get from some sort of whitelist or blacklist. A blacklist is super easy to get around. I think that's just the most basic thing that you can do is find a good third party to provide a chat filter.
Tami.
I would say those chat filters are like the #1 thing you need to do at minimum requirement. Your MVP needs to definitely be chat filters, but I also think to really, really stress, it's got to be a combination of tech and human. Go human, right? There is still nuance. Tech is not 100% there yet. They can filter out certain things, but some things that we have learned especially over the course of the last couple of years, as our community has exploded, is that people are people. They will try to break filters. They'll purposely try to break filters, and kids are smart. Oh my gosh, they are smart. So they will they'll gamify it just to try to break your filters. So you need to have some level of human moderation, looking at the chat, looking at the information that's coming across. I think that's the biggest thing that we've learned. And I'm not saying you need to have thousands of people looking at your content, but you do need to have a certain ratio of tech human.
I think it's that adult engineering bias I'm talking about again, right? Like, I mean, the most obvious thing is to go, and you kind of said it, right? Let's automate everything, right? But it doesn't, like, if there is a significant enough chance that there's going to be an error rate in that from a content point of view with kids, it's not going to work, right? And I think YouTube and Facebook are discovering this, right? They're having to sort of change their paradigms. I mean, I also think, we in our PopJam platform, we don't have any direct real-time messaging. No private messaging, rather, at all. We just cut it out. It's just too hard.
And this is actually, if you're interested in languages, this is actually a super fascinating thing to watch play out in the virtual worlds, especially if you have some sort of blacklist or something. It always needs to be adapted because the children constantly repurpose words. This is always happening. They will say like something that makes no sense to anyone else listening, almost like thieves' cant or something, right? Like they have their own language and it's constantly evolving, and so you at least need a human that's keeping up with that to make sure that you're understanding the new languages that they're coming into your game.
Does the age matter? Does the age of the user, does the under 13 demographic chat filtering and human moderation approach have to differ significantly from the 13 and above in your experiences?
So we have options. At Roblox, we believe it's not our responsibility to decide what is right for your family. You need to decide what's right for your family. What our role is to offer a range of options and features that allow you to make your decisions, right? So I think that, as far as that's concerned, having the ability to have a parent choose curated game, for example, which is an option at Roblox, under 13, where it's under 13 appropriate content. My godson actually complained to me because he can no longer play his favorite paintball game. But again, it's a matter of having the ability to choose what's right for your family. But I do think that there needs to be an option that is appropriate for under the age of 13.
Yeah, and that's going to be specific to the architecture of your game too, right? So Animal Jam is a shared virtual world, and everyone interacts together. There's no sharding or anything like that. And so we have to make sure that everything going on in the world is appropriate for under 13-year-olds.
Dylan, did you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of a pre and post moderation point in there as well, right? I mean, I think depending on the nature of the content, you know, with under 13 and certainly I would say sort of under 8, you want to, as much as possible, be doing running a pre-moderation paradigm where nothing is going live, you know, unless it's actually being screened. I think as you start to move north of that, and certainly north of 13, you can move into a post-moderation paradigm. I mean, that's a very generalized kind of outline, but.
And as far as development is concerned, because we are UGC 100% user-generated content, every game that is developed, and we now have 40 million games on our platform, 40 million. We actually moderate every uploaded image. A human actually looks at uploaded images. So it's a big undertaking.
How about codes of conduct, rules, and enforcing those rules, more importantly?
Yeah, so for our audience, a lot of the code of conduct is implicit, right? We have rules that we expect the kids to follow, and it's not anything, you know, long that you click a checkbox and say yes and nobody ever reads it. So that's very small snippets of things that they need to follow. And
do you enforce them, is the question?
As best we can, yes. So, I mean, like I said, there are lots of creative ways to get around the rules and things like that, especially when it comes to kids doing things like signaling. We found this happening recently. Children will find certain like patterns of emojis or something that means like, hey, I'm on this like Discord, or they'll be on some other communication platform that isn't moderated, and so they can circumvent us that way. I kind of forget what the question was.
It's fine. We're going to move on anyway. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
We're starting to run short on time, so I want to move a little bit quicker. Parental supervision and controls. What are the minimum set of controls you need to have? Do parents even use them? Do they care? And then finally, how do we make them more meaningful? So real fast, Tami. Minimum set of controls. Well, you talked about it some already.
I think I
talked about it. Paul.
Yeah. We have those controls available in Animal Jam, and I would say, unfortunately, not that many people use them. Probably the most powerful thing you can do is make sure that within your organization that this is a value that's important. You know, it's not a marketing bullet point, right? You need to make sure that people understand that these controls are available, and ultimately that probably means that the kids need to understand that they're available.
Dylan, tell us about PopJam's approach to unlocking features based on trust.
Yeah, so this was kind of an additional architectural layer that we put in to add to the content moderation in terms of both AI and humans. So in PopJam, for all the companies that use it, every user, every kid that goes in and that's creating an account has an invisible safety score, which is based on sort of essentially the level of their positive community engagement measured over, I think it's the first 100 days. So in order for them to unlock specific features, they've got to be participating in a positive sense. And if they're essentially misbehaving, and some, like, kids will misbehave because it's their way of essentially testing boundaries, right? You've got to be able to show them in a way that says, hey, you can't do that, but we don't necessarily we're not kicking you out of the community, right? It's a kind of a balance in there. So we have that invisible, that silent safety score that is running in the background. So that is in turn sort of an additional input into how the content moderation has been done. It works very, very well, and it gives you a real scalability vector because you see the sort of the good citizens emerge out of the community.
And I believe there's some element of the number of friends that they have before they can upload photos.
There's a whole bunch of triggers on it in terms of actions for them to take, behaviors for them to do that leads them up that safety ladder. So that you know, I mean, again, for a lot of kids, PopJam is essentially sort of their first real social network, right? So you're trying to sort of give them a set of breadcrumbs about how to behave and what to do.
And I think these kind of measures can be really effective. So they can be over, like, popping up a warning that the child, like, hey, you can't say that in our game. Or it could be something just like silently degrading their chat abilities. Maybe they can't free-form chat anymore. They have to use dictionary words, something like that. I would encourage using these sort of things instead of simply suspending or banning users, though, especially if you're a free-to-play game. it's probably not a surprise that they can just create another account, right? And so doing some sort of like lesson within the game is going to be more effective than just locking them out.
Yeah, and we're looking at all of these features as well, because I think that, you know, kids will try any way to work around any measures that you have. So just slapping them on the hand and banning them is, they're going to find a workaround. But because we all address really young kids who are really just sort of entering in the digital space, it's a great opportunity to train them as to what good digital citizenship is. So if they have like a 3-strike type of thing, and they can have the ability to build up trust levels, they'll learn how to behave in the right way. And it's all about really building up towards trust and civility.
Okay, thanks, Tami. So enough with safety. Let's talk privacy. You ready?
You are so excited right now.
You ready, Dylan? Okay, great. So, lot going on here. Regulatory landscape is growing. We've got COPPA, which has been around for years, and where the FTC still does enforcement, but sort of slow. The VTech case took about 2.5 years to develop. So it might take another 2.5 years before we see another COPPA case from the FTC. Let's hope not. We have the GDPR regulation, which I know some of you are familiar with, and that's coming into effect in Europe on May 25th. We've got student privacy laws, we've got class action lawsuits, but what's most notable, I think, at this point is the GDPR regulation, because like COPPA, GDPR will have some new standards around data collection from kids and getting consent to that data collection, and in some instances getting parental consent. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Unlike COPPA, which sets the bar across the US at 13, the GDPR allows EU member countries to set the bar between 13 and 16, right? So the default is that you're a kid if you're under 16. But each country can lower that age to as low as 13. And we're already seeing quite a bit of variation with that minimum age, with the under 13 cutoff being set by the UK, Ireland, Spain, and under 16, France, Germany, as well as Netherlands and Hungary. So you can imagine that this creates an administrative nightmare, right? So how do you deal with that? Dylan, tell me, in light of those concerns, in light of the varying ages, what on earth are companies supposed to do with respect to knowing if they're dealing with a kid on their platform? And if so, taking the appropriate steps to comply with the GDPR and the consent requirements?
Well, I think once they've stopped weeping and crying when they realize just how difficult Europe is becoming, everyone in the media space, everyone in the content space, and particularly I think companies who are producing what would be kind of general audience family content, has to actually make a decision about what of their content is going to be child directed. Because if they don't, particularly in countries where, with Germany and France now picking 16 as an age, the room for interpretation about is this kid directed or not is very broad. And you can probably make the argument that with a 16 threshold, almost anything is probably child directed to some degree. So you've really, we're, with all of our publisher partners, and particularly actually with the media companies that are operating sort of big properties and different operations across Europe, they are having to make a call on this. We're seeing most companies, if they're operating across Europe, are picking 16. So they have to kind of go highest common denominator. So as they do audits with all of their partners, they're picking 16 at that age. And others are deciding as to whether they're going to be in the kid space or not. And I think those are the first steps that all of these companies have to take. I think the bigger challenge is for companies that have authenticated kids that are over 13 but under 16 in companies like Germany and France, because there's some real questions about. So, for example, if you've signed up to Facebook and you're 14 and you're in Germany, which has just passed a law saying, hey, you're a kid until you're 16, Facebook is most likely, and you might know this more, Facebook's going to have to go and re-authenticate you, and you're going to have to go and get your parent to okay it, or pretend to be your parent, or whatever it is you're going to go and do. But that's a huge exercise that's going to have to be rolled out across Europe.
You don't think lying about your age will work in that context? So why not re-authenticate you and just lie that you're 16 instead of 14?
Well, I mean, I know most teenagers never ever lie, but There's ways to get around everything, and it's not that hard to skip around that. I mean, I think the administrative challenge is going to be one, going through that exercise. I think the second challenge is probably going to be the liability point, right? You know, if you know, or if you've got the capability of knowing what age your users are, if you have sort of profiled them, and particularly for the very, very big companies with extremely built-out infrastructure like Facebook, which is capable of doing very sophisticated community analysis, you know, they will probably be able to do pattern recognition as to sort of a re-authenticating user. So I think there's some really, really interesting questions coming out about Europe, and I think Europe is making, you know, Europe is going to become the biggest privacy-based digital media space in the world, and is probably going to be sort of what the rest of the world looks like in 5 or maybe 10 years.
Has anyone in this room done something to address GDPR? You looked at it, assessed it somewhat? Yes, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, well, Dylan's absolutely right. I think we're going to see a lot of creativity in this area in terms of how to deal with the 13 to 16 sweet spot of users. Do you update your terms of use and just say that if you're under 16, you can't participate? Or do you take a more realistic approach, especially for social media platforms? Oh,
totally. But I mean, even if you think about sort of user acquisition for your mobile games, you know, if you're running sort of what you would consider non-kids games, let's say in France or Germany, and you're doing your regular UA, you know, is your attribution model, whatever you're using as an attribution partner, are they going to be GDPR compliant? They're probably not, right? And that's going to be a big challenge for, I think, games developers just in France and Germany.
So if you're not scared of GDPR yet, if you go to their website, they have a giant countdown till doomsday running on it. So keep an eye on that one.
Yeah, Europe is coming to kill you all. Sorry.
Dylan, is that on your site? The countdown? I haven't seen that. Where's that countdown? I haven't seen it.
That's on the main.
Yeah, it's just on their main website. Yeah.
The European Union Commission? Oh, cool. Okay. Wow.
No, it's literally like we are coming to fuck everybody up. We are coming to take all of your money. Because what's going to happen is that, like, you know, on May 25th it goes live, and there's two really interesting things about GDPR. Well, sort of. One is that, you know, you're going to see the EU go after a bunch of scalps to sort of make examples of companies that are in breach of this, right? That's absolutely 100% going to happen, and they'll go after the big cos, right? There's no doubt about it. The second thing is that under GDPR, it actually allows for civil actions. So civil lawsuits can get taken, which technically under COPPA within the US, that can't happen, right? So you are going to see class action funds being put together in Europe just to go after everybody else, or certainly like obvious targets. So anyone who's sort of a public company in Europe is probably at risk for something like this. It's going to be awesome.
There's going to be a lot of rich lawyers in Europe soon. Cool. So I think there are a few things that you can do today to get ahead of the curve. First off, as we're talking, you should revisit your age screening procedures and parental consent under the GDPR, but also COPPA, and I'll explain to you why in just a minute. You might need to get new consent under the GDPR. So even if you already have consent from a European child under COPPA, you might need to get consent again under GDPR. And then once they turn 13 or 16, you might not, under GDPR, you need to get consent again. So once they become of age and they're no longer represented by their parental guardian, you need to get consent again. Second, I think assessing what data you really need to collect from your users will be important, because there's a minimum data collection standard under GDPR like COPPA. And the basis, why are you collecting that information? Do you have a lawful reason to collect it? You'll need to update your privacy terms. COPPA expects you to have a privacy policy that is clear for parents to understand. The GDPR expects you to have a policy that is clear for children to understand. So that's an important distinction. And as far as Facebook, Google, and Amazon are concerned, Facebook having Messenger for kids, Google having the Family Link product, and Amazon having Alexa and Alexa skills, I caution you not to just copy what they're doing around parental consent. Because for two reasons. One, what they may be doing may not be fully compliant, A, and B, they may have a lot of data on the back end to leverage as part of their other products in getting that authentication. So if you were just going to copy them, you may not be able to rely on the same data. And then finally, do your homework on third parties, and we'll talk about that if we have a few minutes remaining. I think, lastly, strengthening your data security practices is going to be crucial. Here in the US, that's where we're seeing the FTC give attention and scrutiny. Those are easy open and shut cases if you have a security weakness for the FTC to bring. And we're particularly seeing increased scrutiny over the Internet of Things, connected toys, connected wearables, and the like. Do we have anyone here that's got a connected product for kids? No? Okay.
And if we're talking about security, it's important to keep in mind that security has a lot of facets, right? I mean, your app has security, your servers have security, and beyond that, there's social security as well. Well, that's a bad word because that's a government program. So there's
For now.
any sort of like way that people can game the system socially, like getting in through any of your support. Yeah, social engineering. Yeah, that's what I wanted. So you need to keep all those facets in mind if you actually want to keep the data safe.
Tami, I know that password security is an issue for you guys, right? Kids sharing their passwords.
So again, going back to that parental education, I can't tell you how many. I wish I had $1 for every parent who told me that my kid would never give their password out. We have these conversations every day. My kid will never give their password out. And then, inevitably, there is, a sort of a phishing scam for free Robux, which is our virtual currency, that says, I'll give you 1 million Robux if you give me your password. And the 9-year-old goes, okay, that sounds good. And they give out their password, right? And so, again, it's about that education. And I think it needs to go beyond just a marketing blurb. Don't give out your password, that type of thing. It actually has to be built into the product, right? There needs to be, and I'm not saying that you need to scare the bejeebies out of kids, right? But you also need to be transparent. Kids are smart. And I think that you do need to build it in your product to be really, really transparent, to say there is no such thing as free Robux. It is a scam. Don't fall for it. Don't give out your password. And I think that it's a continued education.
And the nice thing about that is you can make your systems aware of these things and have it automatically respond, like a pop-up when a user says password or something like that. So contextually, you can address the issue as it happens.
A quick word on third parties, and then we'll open it up for questions. Of the folks in this room, how many of you would say you know how many third-party SDKs are running inside of your app? 3, 4, 5. Can you give me the number? Can you share the number? One SDK. Wow. Really? Wow. Okay. Is that Clark? Clark? Okay, so not too sure. How many? 5 SDKs. 2 SDKs. Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna challenge all of you after this panel, or perhaps sometime later today, to go onto a website called SafeDK, who I think is exhibiting here, and put in your app, especially if you've got an Android app, and see what the results are, and if it's consistent with your expectation. Number one concern is companies don't inventory their SDKs, their third parties. They don't even know who they're using across a single app, let alone multiple apps.
Well, this was the class action last year, right? I mean, the law firm basically went and just sniffed all the traffic and looked at everything that was being passed back, and you start to discover what's there.
Sure. So I think second, after inventorying your third-party providers, you want to get some kind of contractual assurance that they're doing things in compliance. Now, I know that's going to be hard, right? If you're a small app developer, you're not going to go to Google and say, hey, sign this agreement saying that you comply with COPPA, right? But at least try to get an email assurance from them, even from their sales rep, because at the end of the day, that's going to help you. They won't do it. They won't do it. They won't give you an email?
They really won't. No, okay. Well, of course not. It's Google. Why would they?
Well, agree. In that case, what you want to do is you want to find somewhere where they talk about COPPA, which they do in their terms, and point to that.
That's only on the analytics side, though.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're using Google for any kind of advertising, don't. Trust me.
Okay. Third, you want to validate, when you can, their data collection and use practices before you hire them. You want to read their privacy policies and terms. Oftentimes, they will say that your you cannot use their SDK inside of a child-directed app. And yet many are still doing that. So look at their terms, see what they allow for. And some other guidance here, demand a detailed list of the data elements they're capturing, if you can do that. If you're a bigger company like these guys, you might want to have them complete a privacy or security questionnaire of some kind. And of course, give close scrutiny, as Dylan just mentioned, to advertising platforms, analytics, attribution platforms, social media plugins, and the like. And whenever there's a setting for child-directed treatment, you should definitely take advantage of those.
And I mean, just on that point, one of the great challenges for kids developers is that, you know, the ecosystem, the support ecosystem hasn't been there because it's been so underdeveloped. And we're only kind of now getting to a point, and our company's probably built a lot of it, but there's others out there as well who are essentially replacing all of those traditional pillars with COPPA compliant versions of them. You know, whether it's monetization or social or attribution or whatever. So it is hard, but there are more and more solutions that are appearing.
And then finally, don't take their word for it. Do test. And
well, hold on, unless it's me, in which case you can take their word for it.
Unless it's super awesome.
Important distinction.
No testing needed for super awesome. But definitely test and monitor compliance. And this might be as simple as dedicating somebody within your company tasked with this activity. Even if they can't do it all the time, but periodically, where you can test, have them do that testing, assign that responsibility to somebody within your organization. With that, I think we might have time or no time.
Can I just add one last thing before we go to
please.
questions? Because I feel like we should give the people some good news, Shai.
What's the good news?
Well, like we've spent the last, whatever, 30, 40 minutes talking about how hard the space is and all the shit that you shouldn't do and why you basically shouldn't do anything in the kid space at all. But from an investor perspective, honest to God, it has never been a better time to start building in the kids' digital space. You know, there are huge opportunities there because it's difficult. It means you tend to have less competition. There, you know, if you look at sort of the new brands that are coming through, there aren't that many. And if you think about what the top kids brands are going to be in 5 years or 10 years, I can tell you they're definitely not the same 5 or 10 that are the biggest today. So, you know, even though it's hard, I really would encourage you to absolutely persevere because there are already some big winners in the space and there are going to be bigger winners, you know, and they're starting today.
And I also think it's good news that you don't have to do this alone. Like, a takeaway should be that there are resources to help you. Don't be like, no, we got this. I watched this presentation at Casual Connect. This is a good thing, not to disparage what we're talking about here. But meet with some of these legal resources, people that know what they're doing, and even more importantly, like a safe harbor association.
You know, so +2 for everything you guys have just said. There are plenty of organizations and companies that are already starting to pave the way. Family Online Safety Institute is a wonderful resource for information. They're a nonprofit organization based in DC that we learn from. We gather consistently to learn best practices from one another. So, you know, again, there's a lot of information that's out there. Don't let this talk dampen your creativity and determination to put something great out there.
That's right. Well, you know, what's interesting about Messenger Kids from our angle, particularly on the compliance side, is they seem to be leveraging their adult accounts as the authentication mechanism for linking kid accounts. And while it might appear that they have sophisticated data that they're leveraging for that purpose, age of the account, number of friends, it seems like the only requirement is that the parent account that creates the kid profile is 18 or older, and that's it.
So I think two things about Messenger Kids. I think one, it's actually a great validation point of Facebook going, okay, shit, there's children on the internet, we should do something about this, it's a real market, right? That's genuinely a good thing. I think the second thing, which has been fascinating, is the realization, and I've spoken to friends of mine over in Facebook, about the fact that so many parents were horrified by the notion of sort of Facebook interacting with their kids. So I think, like, ironically, for a lot of parents who weren't very hands-on with their kids in terms of digital supervision, the announcement of Facebook Messenger Kids made them much more concerned because, you know, we've kind of all adjusted to the fact that Facebook is capturing all of our information, right? And it's kind of making parents much more aware. So I think it also highlighted probably the lack of family-friendly vibes that a lot of the big Silicon Valley brands are engendering, you know, within society at the moment. So it's really interesting.
Great. That it's a wrap. Thank you.